Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about how you can become part of the community at officehours.global. You'll see a little link down below. The first hour is general discussion, any questions that people have around media or virtual production. The second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about Tony Mobley's show, Conversations with Tony Mobley. And the team has come together and built a show out of it. And so we're going to talk about that in the second hour. Tomorrow is the long day. We've got education from 8 o'clock, and it's not streamed to YouTube, so that turns off a little bit. 10 o'clock, we've got Nick Justin talking about getting metahumans out and into Unreal. At 11 o'clock, we have Project Belfast, where we're taking over a musical location. We have a band, and that we're taking over the switching, the graphics, etc., remotely. So we're playing with that. It's really interesting. And at noon, we'll be back with Damayanti Gajar from South Africa, and we'll be learning how to cook something new. And it's really, really fun. I would highly recommend going out, getting some food, and just a webcam or a phone, and just jump on and join us and cook with us. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill?
Good day, everybody. The first one comes in this morning from our panelist, Rupert McRae, and he's asking out of Dallas, Texas, what methods of providing feature suggestions to Zoom has been found to be the most responsive and ultimately successful?
For me, it's actually been using the support. I think it's support.zoom.us. It has been less of an issue around, I find them fairly responsive. It's less of an issue of where to go, and it's more of an issue of how to ask. So, being very specific when I have specific issues. Now, if you're asking for something that's out of the box, there's a lot of other ways you have to kind of work through that. But if you're having a real support issue, I find that continuing to be tenacious about it and responding to what they're saying, it slowly moves up in Zoom's rankings. So it becomes a little bit more, you'll get to someone more senior if the person you're talking to can't fix it. And Rupert, are you having trouble clicking on the back end, or is it?
That question had moved over, so I couldn't click on it anymore.
You couldn't?
It went into answered. But I was just going to add that the question was also more like feature requests, as in suggestions for new functions, providing feedback and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, there's a lot of folks watching our show. So usually us having discussions of things that we wish were in Zoom are useful. David?
As an enterprise customer, we have a monthly get together with our service rep from Zoom. So we'll usually pepper them with a bunch of things that we'd like, and hopefully, it doesn't fall on deaf ears.
Right. Yeah. Next question
comes to us again from Rupert McRae. He's got a second one in from Dallas. And is there a way to run Android under emulation or in virtualization on a PC or a Mac? I'm thinking of a way to run a native Android tablet Zoom Room controller from the desktop without having to have a separate device.
There is an Android emulator for Windows, and I can't remember. We used it, and it kind of worked, but it gave us inputs and outputs. The reason we were using it is that we were trying to get a proper camera into Instagram at the time. So that was our real challenge. Go ahead, Jonas.
There is BlueStacks, but one of the issues that I found with BlueStacks is it needs specific virtualization features on and off. I couldn't get it to work on my PC because I have some other virtualization set up. And I also couldn't get it to work in the cloud yet. And also, there's a strange thing with the Room Controller app. It checks for the tablet mode. And I don't think you can enable that one on BlueStacks. So sadly not.
Go ahead, David.
And if I'm not mistaken, Parallels on Mac had an Android build or an Android image you could put on it. I'm not sure if it would be applicable there.
Next question.
Comes to us from our friend Andy Curluccio in Washington, D.C. Any suggestions for sharing my Android phone screen to vMix? Fold 3 has arrived, and I have many ambitions for it.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So normally I'm an iPhone guy, and I am a PC guy, as most people know, but I have normally all over the place these Dell docks, USB 3 or sometimes Thunderbolt Dell docks, and they've got all these ports on them, everything else. And I have just been randomly plugging my phone sometimes into those docks to see what happens. On the USB 3 ones, if you have the Display Link Presenter app, that'll duplicate your display onto any of the displays that you have connected, or sometimes just the primary one. But if you plug it into one of the Thunderbolt docks, you get a full desktop environment. So just plug it into some of those docks and see what you get.
David?
There's a company called Screen Beam that makes a bunch of adapters that use Miracast, and I think that's the native Android screen duplicating. You might be able to plug that into like an ATEM, bring it into vMix that way.
Jonas?
Because it has a weird resolution that isn't full HD, you probably will have issues with the typical ways. But what should work is Larry's Screencaster and then SRTing it into vMix, because that one is resolution agnostic.
Next question.
Next question comes from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas again. And he says, has anyone used a Brio in a teleprompter, such as a 10 to 12 inch? Any problems or challenges in doing so?
I was trying to find a picture of it, but we've actually used C920s, not Brios, but C920s. And what we did, and for some reason I just can't quite grab a hold of that photo from my photos library. It comes up often enough. I should have it out. But essentially, what we did is we took a silvered piece of glass, the glass that you would normally use, and we vacuum packed we basically built a vacuum pack for the 920 into the right behind the glass. So we got it right where it needed to go. And then we had it all sitting in a piece of plastic that was actually formed to fit the camera with one little area for the cable to go out. And so literally it was very convenient because you could pull it up and there's no stuff in the background. It's just it looks like a plane with a little bump on it, and worked really well. We moved to larger cameras relatively quickly after that, so we didn't use it as much as we thought we would. But you can definitely build that. I think I don't remember. I'll have to find out. Marty Brennis is the one that put it together, and I'm just trying to find the picture, but I can't find it that quickly. Next question.
Jeff Francis in Columbia, South Carolina, and here on the panel often says, are there many consumer smart light bulb speaker combos available? Does a professional version exist, i.e. one that uses RF wireless instead of Bluetooth, or a higher SPL?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There are a few of them that I know. I think Monster is one of them that actually makes a Bluetooth speaker system that is RF available. And with the lighting, that's not the same thing if you're looking for a light and speaker combo. But a lot of them, there are a few that are RF enabled. You just have to look for them. And yeah.
I'm just trying to think of light bulb and speaker. Is it so you can speak to people through the light bulb? I just don't know whether these are two different things or they're all in one piece.
I've seen them used in restaurants where they wanted to put a little background music speaker over the table. A light bulb small speaker exists for that kind of use.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Next question.
Jonas Dautel of Stuttgart, Germany, here on the panel, who was just speaking a moment ago, says, any suggestions for good sub 200 euro headphones to monitor audio?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, sorry, I misread it thinking they were in-ear because I thought for here. So those are Shure SE215s are about £90, and the ones I've presently got now are the MEE M6 Pros. But if he's talking about over the ear, then someone will have some better suggestions. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, the most popular ones in the industry are going to be the Sony 7506s. You'll see those everywhere. They're pretty flat and neutral. Biodynamic 770s, also popular on the Sennheisers, especially in Europe. The HD 25-1-2s, those are what I use. I love those because they have this nice adjustable caliper pressure and the ability to flip up your side earmuff up. And they also come with velour earmuffs, which are super comfy compared to the other standard neoprene ones. And then there was one more. Oh yeah, Audio-Technica ATEM 50s are also super popular, and those are $100.
Go ahead, John Preto.
Both Tucker and I use these, which are the Ultra Zones. They're made in Germany, and they're right at your price point.
And David?
Nope, I was going to say the 7506 like Guy, so that's 2 votes for 7506.
There you go. Next question.
Tim Holm in San Lorenzo is up next with, I was gifted a Raspberry Pi P400. How can I use this to benefit live streaming? I have good other ways for playout, but what else can I do with it that is practical and not just a clock or something?
Go ahead, Rupert.
This might be a bit of a edge case and may not be for everyone. And I'd need to check on the specs of that Raspberry Pi specifically. But we sometimes talk about Speedify for bonding connections and stuff like that. I recently saw that you can turn a Raspberry Pi into a Speedify router. So you can put in multiple outbound connections and share it over your network as a incoming connection. So it may not be ideal for like high load situations or true production, but it's certainly something interesting to check out.
Jonas?
There are multiple things that you can do. You can use it as a companion build. So you can put companion on it, so you can control it that way. Another cool way that I have done is if you use something like Slido, any website that brings in information for you, you can put that on a Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi just shows that website and does nothing else. So I always can cut to that. And then you can also use it as a SRT mini server, not mini server, as an SRT server. So you could transmux the RTMP from your ATEM into SRT, or you can build your own streaming bridge.
Go ahead, John.
I have two of them. Of course, you can use it for playout B, but you say you have a good playout connection already. The other one I use for screen sharing that's tied into the ATEM. So I pull up the web browser that's built in and do screen share.
Next question.
Tony Mobley, our friend here from Noonan, Georgia, on the panel and doing the second hour, says, any advice on dealing with nervousness before a broadcast?
Go ahead, George.
Good morning, Tony. First, have some water handy. I like to keep water just to keep your palate wet. Also, a few deep breaths. I also personally, I burn a meditation candle, even on office hour right now, there's one burning in the background. So I like to keep things, a good scent and water will keep things kind of calm for you.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Would say stand up and walk around a bit, move your body a bit so you can get the adrenaline down, and also just drink something. Yeah, that helps.
Good, Rupert.
So, I mean, nervousness at least tells me that I have some energy in me, you know, actually caring about it is rather than just being, you know, not active at all. And I just try and find ways to reutilize that energy and put it into the production.
Bill, real quick.
Yeah, I was going to say redefine it. You can think of it as nervousness. You can also think of it as excitement, and that's part of your performance. Get ready for it. You're coming up to doing something you love doing. Just redefine it in your brain from nervousness to excitement, and I think you'll be fine.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I'd worry if you weren't nervous. You need that touch of nervousness shows that you have the interest, same as what Rupert and Bill just said.
From a logistical perspective, really understanding how you're going to get in and out of the show is the most important. And practicing that and knowing exactly what you're going to say really helps a lot. And then patterns, do it, knowing that you're going to set everything up in a certain way, kind of sets you up in a ramp to get into a show. And then finally, lots of practice. Come on the panel as often as possible. The best way to get over nervousness of being live is to be live all the time. After a while, it becomes, you kind of deaden off all the nerves that were making you nervous. You just beat them into submission through repetition. Next question.
Jim Hankins in Chesterfield, Michigan is up next. And he says, what Meraki models are panelists having success with for remote kits? And he's looking for site-to-site VPN solutions.
The ones that we use, the one I am on right now is a Z3, and you can get the Z3 or the Z3C, which has a cellular backup. Getting the cellular SIM without a phone is a real pain in the neck, but you can do it. It really depends on what you need your stateful throughput to be. So I think mine is limited to like 100 megs a second. So if I really want to download something, I have to get out of it and pull something down. So as you start to buy up into the larger systems, you get more bandwidth. But from a remote site location, that's the thing that affects us the most. The Z3s are nice and small. There's the MX. I don't remember what they used to be, MX60s, but I think they're 64s or 68s or something. Those were the most common for our kits because I think they're a little bit more bandwidth. I think it's 100, 200 megs a second. But it just depends on what you need from that far end, as far as speed goes. As you get the bigger ones, you're going to have, obviously they handle a lot more tenants, but you usually don't need that. for a remote site. It's just mostly just the stateful speed. You just have to look at that on each one of them to figure it out. But the Z3s as a kind of a remote for general purpose has been really successful and not very expensive compared to the other ones. Yeah. Next question.
Friend Eric Eckert in Bad Arnhem, Germany says, I need to build 4 boxes for 4 speakers in the same room. By boxes, I mean boxes for the people. Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I'm assuming you're talking for Zoom rooms, or are you actually making boxes for actual speakers? For the Zoom room thing, if you are desktops over laptops, and of course,
and I think that what he's talking about here is putting people in a sound booth, like sound booths for people. So that's that's the Go ahead, Jonas.
What you could use is we have used flip charts, those moving ones, and then throwing blankets over them and building some kind of roof for them, because they insulate pretty well if you have the ones that are foam instead of like hard surfaces, and then just building something out of those.
Yeah, there's another. If you need them pre-built and you just want to put them up, there's a company called Whisper Room. That's all they do is they build these rooms. So in a lot of the larger events that we just have ordered those, and there's places that'll rent them to you as well. But you can Whisper Room is the one that we've bought in the past, where we just build a room for everyone. They have some isolation between them. What they really are good at is a nice diffuse room that isn't going to echo. That's going to be in there. But when we've done interpreters, for instance, we've separated them all with Whisper Rooms, to make that work. Of course, you can build those. The main thing is, if you're going to build them, you want to try to create some isolation in the same room, and that means air gaps. Sealed air gaps. So a small room that's floated. Literally is a way to kind of start to separate them from each other. It just depends on how much money and time you have to put them up. Bill, real quick.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what Alex said entirely. It depends on whether your goal is separation or isolation. If your goal is separation to keep somebody speaking out of somebody else's microphone or something, they have plexiglass booths for drummers and things like that you can buy from some of the houses. But if you really want true isolation so that person speaking is not picked up by any of the other microphones, you're stuck with voice booths, and they get expensive. They start around $4,000 and go up pretty fast after that.
And remember that you want to have mic, it depends on whether the people are in front of the, what mic you use. You want to start looking at something that has more off-axis rejection, because it'll do some of the isolation for you when you can. Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael. He says, what lower, medium, and digital mixing consoles have you had most success with for theater specifically?
Tlaloc?
So I'm going to speak to the things you need. I'm not going to speak to specific brands. You need to be able to have queues so that you can go from queue to queue to queue and bring in the correct mics at the correct time. You need to have some sort of show control, whether it be OSC or MIDI. And you need to be able to have the appropriate number of faders to be able to work really, really fast, because things move so quickly in musical theater.
Next question.
Moving on to the next question, we get one from Mark Giuliani in Alexandria, Virginia. And he says, in the ATEM Software Control software, what do the settings Pivot and Lum mix control? Is one of them similar to brightness?
Go to Roscoe.
Yeah, a lot of times you have scenes that are really dark and you want to change kind of where your middle gray would be, and you want to push it more towards the darkness. So pivoting is kind of choosing, it's like choosing gamma almost, that you know the scene's dark, so you want to move where that middle point is so that it spends, you get better blacks or you get better whites. You're changing that middle point. Lumix is just the legacy of Resolve is that it came from the older technology. So they have both RGB processing of color and they have YRGB processing of color. And you may prefer one to the other. Supposedly true colorists like YRGB. It gives them more detail. This is a question a little out of my league, but you can choose how much to mix between the YRGB and normal RGB.
Go ahead, Mark. Is Mark here?
I am here. Sorry. I just rose my hand in case I had to extend the question and explain it more.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Does that make sense, though?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Roscoe.
Yep. Next question.
Rupert McRae is back from Dallas, Texas with this one. Are there any recent experiences to report with the use of NDI5?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I've been running. I switched everything to NDI5. Works really well. Couple small downfalls is if you have anything NDI4 that hasn't been doing regular updates, it might fail miserably. And then, of course, if your NDI does pop out, you will get the NDI animated graphic rather than a blank screen, which has been, a little frustrating if you're in a live environment.
Next question.
Jason Sipe comes to us next from Murrieta, California, and he says, Kanye West and Apple Music collaborated yet again last night. What do the panelists think of this type of live stream experience with Apple Music? And I have a link there.
Go ahead, George.
So I watched it. Obviously, visually, it was good to look at. I think Apple, when they got rid of the festival, they're going to try to see how they could invest some more of that money. So we'll see with this second phase of COVID, we're probably going to see more Apple trying to invest in more of these events. So, I think it's a good thing for artists.
Was there any interactivity, or are you just watching a concert?
No, I just watched it. There was a few.
I don't think Apple has any way for people to interact at all. Like it's a passive viewing, right? No, I'm just curious. I think that's going to be the next thing, is figuring out how the audience can be involved. I know that we keep talking about that. I feel like I don't understand why if something's live, if it's not interactive. Like if the audience doesn't have any way to interact with it, why not just play it out? Like we just watch the video anywhere. It's not like we're all watching it together. So it's an interesting. I'm just fascinated by the process. Next question.
Comes to us from Serge Blondin of Sharebook QC, and he asks, would it be possible for office hours to get a list of recommended products somewhere, a website or an Amazon wish list?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, specific communities may have specific needs. I think it's way too broad of a thing. I put together a little list just for teachers to use for inexpensive gear. You can find that on Discord, but there's so much variety. What price point are we looking at? So I don't know that we could do it without it'd be a full-time job for somebody to maintain.
Yeah, we are looking at, that's a direction the website will probably go, is having reviews and talking about things and having kind of the current list of what we're using. The hardest part is that it changes all the time. There are some things we've settled on, but a lot of things are like, oh, we've decided this one. Like I really, really like TechRise, and then TechRise changed the way it did its interface, and then we're all like, okay, now we got to find something else. And so, but I think that keeping something up of basic kits on the website, we'll talk to Ken and figure out a way that we can take some of the things. Maybe we'll have second hours where we just define what is a great, kit for this or kit for that, and then that's what we hold for at least the moment. So we'll play with that. Next question. Oh, Guy, go ahead before we move on.
Yeah, we started to put together something loosely based on our site with the things that we hear popping up all the time: the pocket cinema cameras, headphones with the sidekicks, and the two that we mentioned in Jonas's question earlier, some lenses, some lighting. I know you talk about the apertures, the Nanlite, the Pavitube 6Cs, ring lights, the microphones, the Heils, the MV7, Rode Go wireless, sound devices, mixers, prompters, Mimo Live, some streaming stuff, then the switchers, transmitters, webcams, Brio, HuddleCam. So I'll put a link to the chat to this page.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says the Taiwan Central Epidemic Command Center uses mobile phone tracking to enforce quarantine compliance. Since they do not require installing an app on the device, how would they be doing said tracking?
Cell towers. That's how they do it. They can, so they can triangulate your position through cell towers pretty effectively. And that's not even a very new thing. It's 15 years old, maybe more. So they can, your cell phone, if it's on, and even if it's off, a lot of times, if there's a battery in it, they can see where it's at. So you just need to know that your cell phone is your position unless you take the battery out. And it probably is even a little after you take the battery out. So you just want to kind of keep that in mind. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, up next here on the panel. Are there some Shure SM58 clones that are actually pretty good, at least in terms of audio quality, not necessarily nail hammering quality or longevity?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So yeah, I've experienced a few different ones. My biggest story comes from when I went to New York. Completely forgot my microphones for some interviews, and I went down to B&H and I bought a couple of the Pile SM58 knockoffs, and they worked really well. It's about side rejection. It's about being able to talk into the microphone without too many plosives. But the capsules are fairly easy, and I think you can actually make 58s. There's a couple websites that show you how to do that.
Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, for $99.95, the Sennheiser E845 is a very good alternative to the SM58. Not quite as good at penny nails, but really as good on audio, if you ask me.
Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael. Douglas Carmichael says, if you were building a virtual production studio based around Unreal Engine or another engine with DMX input support, would you have a lighting console in the studio along your audio chain so that LDs can feel more at home?
There's a couple answers to that. Go ahead, Talak.
Yeah, so right off the bat, yes, we feel a lot more comfortable with a console that is like a theater for us if we're theater designers. I want you to also consider, though, the fact that Unreal Engine on its own with no lighting rig built into it and a light board next to it doesn't do anything. So there's a lot of work that has to happen first in order to make a rig that you can then light with and control via DMX. That's one thing to consider. The other thing is, to feel even more at home, I would have an operator. So I would come into your studio, or be an operator, and I would call lights to that person, and they would program it. I would never have to think about what the programming is. Get out of the programming head, because that's two heads, and it breaks apart what I'm trying to do.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Would actually not put it in, not because of it's not the perfect console for what you're trying to do. I would try to find an interface that is native to Unreal Engine, something that makes more sense for that, because you don't have to do you don't have to go fixture based and then change the color there. You can move around the fixtures. You can completely change everything. I would hire a lighting designer like Talalok, tell him that's what we want to go for, and then as a lighting designer, I imagine it's amazing to be able to change physics. Like, you can change everything to envision the vision, and then give them a control board that's not what they normally have, so they can create new and give them something that works and makes the show work. But it's the same issue we have with audio managing in the cloud. All A1s that work in the cloud start out with that's not my console. And when they start to work around it, and then it's suddenly oh yeah, that's pretty nice working this way. So I think we should stop trying to reinvent an old controller and maybe see if we can find something new that works better for the workflow.
Another note, Unreal Engine is a lot of work. It's not, to use it as a digital set, it seems like a quick fix, and people have tried to do it with green screen and trying to do it with LED walls. The LED walls have a lot of issues with them, both moire as well as compression issues. And green screen is you really have to, you'll spend a lot of time and money before the green screen will really look compelling. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind as you start to go down that path, is that it's a deep and complicated waters, to do that. When we look at it at Mandalorian, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars and some really smart people thinking through how to make that work. They make it look easy, but the R&D for that was years, and so you just want to kind of keep that in mind as you think about those things. Next question.
Michael Marsh in San Anselmo, California asks, as Adobe Media Encoder renders lately, it has been slowing the MacBook Pro to a crawl. He can't multitask when this is running. The mouse is slow with lots of waiting. What can I do to tame this, quote, resource hog?
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, what I don't know the details of the MacBook Pro, the specs, but I notice on my PC when I use Media Encoder, it really takes advantage of the NVIDIA graphics card a lot more than just rendering it within Premiere Pro.
Yeah, I find that there's a great add-on to Media Encoder that makes it a lot faster on a Mac, only on a Mac. It's called Compressor. It runs like a lot faster than Media Encoder. It's a lot easier to use, and in my opinion, a lot of times compresses better. So you know, compressor is, in my opinion, far superior to Media Encoder, and I've used both fairly extensively. So there are some very specific things that we need Media Encoder for, but for the most part, you'll find that compressor on a Mac runs way faster and way more smoothly than Media Encoder. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, what would you think of a matching service for people interested in internships or entry-level opportunities in virtual production and those that offer them? Could this idea work in the office hours framework?
Yeah, at some point. I mean, we have kind of looking for help that's there right now. It's kind of informal. We are going to be giving people opportunities over the next little bit of time to be part of a lot of the stuff that we're doing. And you can see informally people doing that now with Project Belfast, with Tony Mobley show, with other things like that. And so you want to look for opportunities to be helpful in those. So there's some informal pieces right now, and we're in the process of building up the teams. I'm just in the process of structuring them and starting to reach out to folks to kind of organize it. So you'll see the opportunity to have a lot of places to contribute soon. Next question.
Next question is cool. Michael Marsh in San Anselmo, California says, what is a kernel task and how can it possibly use 400% of the CPU?
Go ahead, Jonas.
So there are two questions. So how can it use 400% of the CPU? That only happens on Macs, because what Macs do is 100% is specific to one core. So if you have 10 cores, you can go to 10,000% or 1,000% versus just 100. So what this means is it uses 100% of 4 cores, but it could also be spread across more cores. So it could actually be like 60% on 6 cores or something. And the kernel task is the OS itself will basically, it's what makes your machine work and which manages all the different other tasks.
Roscoe?
Yeah, and it's used to take the temperature down on the CPU. So from your question earlier where your CPU is being brought to a crawl, when you throw a process at the CPU and it's going to overheat, then a kernel task takes over and slows that process that's running that heat way down.
And for our producers, we'll probably run a little short on the first hour if we don't have more questions. We have a lot of questions stacking up for Tony's show, so we might move into that early. But if you've got more general questions, this is a good time to ask. Let's go to the next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is back this morning with a leftover client question. Is it risky or rewarding to list one's own clients on one's own website?
Go ahead, Ken.
It's only risky if you're listing clients and you did very little for them and then someone asks. I don't have any on mine, mainly because I find it hard to self-promote. But yeah, it's not risky. It's so common now that I think they almost become word blind to them, unless you've got a very specific detailed breakdown of what exactly you did for that client. And then again, I don't find those very useful because I treat every client uniquely, and those examples often don't really correlate across other clients.
David?
From the enterprise standpoint, we get these requests all the time, and they have to go through legal in order for clearance, etc. I've been quoted as such as just being David B, major company, blah, blah, blah kind of thing. So just be careful with who or how you're quoting whomever.
Yep. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I have one thing that we do where we have clients that companies don't even exist anymore, and we have them on the website. And I've asked, should we take it down? It's like, no, because it's still part of our work. It's kind of like a resume right there. The only thing that I will not put up is anything that we're doing, any type of NDA type work for them. Then we'll just leave those behind.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'd just say be careful, get permission, and be super careful if you've done work for a client, but that client was through an agency. You do not want to claim anything that's second tier without letting everybody know and getting specific permission, because it's not your client, it's somebody else's client. You're working for that somebody else. Be careful.
Yeah, we tend not to put a ton of stuff on the website about in a conversation or a deck. We might have more about what we do, but putting it on a public area is usually something we tend not to do very much. Next question.
Ernest Floyd in Bastrop, Louisiana says, what's a good wireless camera to use with OBS? I've got an event next month. They will not allow me to run wires. The budget is $500 to $1,000 per camera.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I guess it depends on exactly what you're doing and how many cameras and so on. But with a nominal budget, you could use iPhones. You may have those already, or you can get pretty usable results from anything from 8 above. 10 above would be better. And then you've got a couple of options how to do it. You could, if you've got a predictable Wi-Fi environment, you could use NDI cam and then pick that up over the network. You could maybe set up your own Wi-Fi if you needed to do that or felt it would be more reliable. Or you could use something like Filmic Pro and airlink that to Apple TVs. Again, you want to get, whether it's Apple TVs or Wi-Fi, you'll want to get your receivers as close as you can to the cameras and then backhaul that to your mixer. If you went the Apple TVs, then you'll need obviously some kind of capture device, but I think you could still do that within your budget.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's a guy who specializes in doing this and teaching people about it. Steady Ready Chris, just like Rupert said, the iPhones, he uses these Netgear wireless routers. If it were me, I would probably go more with the HDMI transmitter and go into something like, a hardware switcher, like a ATEM at 295. If you can pull that off, that just, I love hardware, but these things are going to be $400 if you already have a HDMI camera. That would be the way to go because you can go further. But I'll put a link to Steady Ready Chris because the stuff that he does is amazing. And then our local high school here has really good luck with the Teradek Air app. So they run the main switcher is on an iPad, and then there's a bunch of other kids with iPads as well, and it works amazingly well. But they have a pretty robust network in the school with as far as their Wi-Fi. So it all comes down to testing and having a good Wi-Fi route.
Go ahead, Jonas.
You could also use the HoloLens views that Guy showed, or similar to the ones that Guy showed, and then a Camlink Pro who has for HDMI inputs if you have a normal tower PC into OBS.
Yeah, and I don't know whether the budget that you're talking about is to buy the cameras or to rent the cameras. If you're looking at renting the cameras, you can rent a full camera package like a Blackmagic Ursa, with a lens, with a bolt, Teradek bolt. I think on borrow lenses, if you went down to, let's say, a 6K with a good lens, with a good lens, you're probably with a bolt, even the 4K bolt, just because it has more range. For each one of those cameras, you'd probably be set back $600 or $700 a camera. So, and with support, you might get to $800. So in the $1,000 range, if you're talking about renting the camera, $500 to $1,000 each, you can get a pretty well-built kit that is wireless. But if you're trying to buy it, yeah, there's a lot of that's a much more difficult thing to do in that price range. Next question.
JHB out of New York City says, is there a way to edit my question once it's been posted, but before it's been answered? Thanks.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yes, the easiest way I find is if it's not, as long as it's not been voted on, just to delete it and write it again.
Yeah, and it's mostly a matter of we don't allow people to change them because really it is you could put someone could theoretically put something into a question, people start voting it up, and then one word changes it, or even an apostrophe or something else can change the meaning of the question. So we, it's a pretty standard practice that's why you can't edit your Twitter. So anyway, that's why we do that. Yeah, as Ken said, the easiest way to do it is just delete it and then bring it back as another question. But also just be really careful when you write it. It's just know that it's going to go out, but we kind of keep it permanent for that reason. Go ahead, Rupert.
I think you can actually delete your question even if it has been voted on.
Yeah,
obviously,
you can vote on it.
You're sacrificing your votes, but you can delete it and resubmit it. It'll just have to build up votes again.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Next question comes from Rupert McRae, and he says, how widely anticipated is ISO audio in ZoomISO?
Tlaloc?
I think this is a huge thing. I think it's going to really push ZoomISO forward. Thursday, on ZoomISO Test Kitchen. Jeff Wingren talked with Andy Carluccio regarding this. There's a definite roadmap and also a bleeding edge alpha that he's already got it working on. Go check it out, and super, super exciting. You know, if I had this, if I had this 8 months ago, it would have been a game changer. So it's huge.
Yeah, it'll be massive when it's done. I think that right now we're still in early days where it works mostly, but I think that when we get to a point where it's properly supported, it's going to be amazing. Next question.
Lucas Herzog of Mainz, Germany is up next, and he asks, what is the panel's overall strategy for redundant streaming? What are common pitfalls?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Have a backup for everything and think through your whole workflow. And one of the most common pitfalls is if somebody starts at YouTube and uses their A/B streaming and then moves over to another CDN, that A/B sometimes doesn't mean it's failing over. It means half of the audience get your backup stream where you just show the please stand by, we have a issue problem, which you don't want. And one of the other pitfalls is if you don't try your backup, you don't have a backup.
Yeah. Rupert?
I mean, I think we could easily cover all the technical redundancy parts, but once that's taken care of, the most common problems are people and geography. You know, you can set up all this stuff, but if you have an operator fall out for some reason, you've got to get somebody else in there, and then you have maybe you have a geography problem. So people and geography.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we get into that are having two ways out, preferably two entirely different ways. And so a satellite and fiber, or a terrestrial internet and cellular, and mixing and matching those so that you can have a couple failures. For the most intense events that we've done, we actually use all four. So we have 4 ways out of a location. But the thing you want to look at, as Jonas said, is that remember that most of these CDNs, whether it's taking the backup stream or the primary stream, is based on the player, not on what you're sending. And so the player is making decisions about, oh, I'm not getting the frames as fast as I wanted, so I'll just switch over to the backup and try that. And so when it's available to it, it often will take it. So you have to assume that you have to treat both of your streams as primaries. And they both have to have quality. We've definitely had ones where we're clear that 25 or 30% of the audience is watching the backup. And the problem with that is that we used to use, until we figured that out, we were using like a live view as the backup for a satellite truck, but that didn't really work. So we moved to having backups go back to a master control that then is having a person switch between the two. So we have primary and backup going out of the location, but there's a person sitting there watching it and making a manual decision as to what they're sending out. Next question.
JHB in New York is up next with, I missed the first 2 parts of the metahuman topic. What is the best way to get started experimenting with metahumans and Unreal Engine? Thanks.
Download metahuman, try to make something. That's, watch the video. I think we have the video up there, so you can watch the video of kind of a quick tour of it, but it's really not hard to play with. And so I would, all you got to do is just jump in there and move stuff around and get it working. But that's the best. We're going to go through exporting it from metahuman to Unreal. So this week will be important to be there and be part of that. Last week was mostly kind of an introduction, so we can kind of talk through it. Next question.
Audio consoles are up next. Douglas Carmichael asks, I've been interested in the Allen Heath SQ series, but the SQ does not have OSC, but it has MIDI or queue management. Since 90% of my work wouldn't be theatrical, would it still be a useful choice for a personal console control surface?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
QLab, which is widely used in the theatrical world, outputs both OSC and MIDI. And if you're stuck in one or the other, there's a software called Osculator. I'll put a link in that will translate between OSC and MIDI.
Next question.
Stan Chan in Roseville, California is up next with, what's the largest number of events per second anyone has seen in an environment using OSC?
Slovak.
So Stan, I know you're asking for a quantitative answer, and I don't have that for you, but I do know that when we're doing things like fading lights up and down or fading audio faders up and down, if we're sending information in a float, it gets to be too fast. So what we do is we actually only send information every certain amount of times. So there is a limit. I just don't know exactly the number of what that limit is, but we have tricks around it.
Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, Rupert, you mentioned using iPhones as a low-budget wireless camera. Would airplane mode eliminate the risk of receiving a call or text during the show?
Go ahead, Rupert.
So, I mean, airplane mode can help. Obviously, that's going to close down all your radios, so you'll need to re-enable Wi-Fi. But if you're connecting to a Wi-Fi network that has internet access, then you're still at risk from getting push notifications or even IP-based phone calls these days. So the next step might be to set up a Wi-Fi network that doesn't have internet for when you're doing this, and then hopefully you can keep your phone completely offline, but it still doesn't sort of guarantee things popping up. So I would either use dedicated phones for this purpose, with no apps installed other than what you want, or lock the phone into single app mode or enroll it in MDM. But that's what I've got to say.
Todd.
There are some apps that preempt incoming notifications, like Filmic and various things like that. So look at that. But the rest of that answer was nailed by Rupert. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ken.
You can put your phone into I can't remember the mode is. I use it all the time. It's got a little crescent moon. You press that.
Oh, do not disturb.
Do not disturb, and you don't get any notifications.
Yeah, there's a couple internal notifications that Apple will give you, which is kind of annoying. Like when you say "do not disturb," you kind of want it to be "do not disturb," and that hasn't been set up as a hard rule. I have to admit that I turn most notifications off on everything. So my poor iMac, you can't turn it completely off, and so at 9:59. The only time I can get messages on my iMac is between 9:59 and 10 p.m. And they all come up as a long list like, oh my gosh, I had to tell you this. That's so long ago. Next question.
Peter Rosato in Las Vegas, Nevada is up next. And he says, have the panelists seen episode 2 of The Mandalorian Gallery, where they talk about Luke's scene in the final episode for S2? And any thoughts about it, if so?
I don't think any of us have seen it yet. It's on my weekend. This is what I'm going to watch this weekend. So I think it just came out, and haven't seen it yet. So maybe we'll bring that back up again next week. I know I will have seen it by next week. I just haven't had time during the week. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, even with balanced cables, should you always use the shortest cable run possible? For example, if you have a mic at your desk and the mixer on your desk, should you keep it to a short XLR cable?
Yeah, I would recommend keeping it as short, all cables as short as possible when they're analog. Every analog cable to me is a liability. So it's going to be something that could pick up something else. So it doesn't mean that you can't use them. I have them, running around here and there. But I try to not have them coiled up. If I'm coiling them up, I try to I get a shorter cable that is just the length that I need comfortably. The main thing is not make them so short that they start putting pressure on the components. So that's the only other thing you want to think about. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Alex just said. Also, if you have a coil of cable, let's say you have a 50-footer and it's sitting there, you're using it for a 4-foot run, Murphy's Law says it is going to get knocked off, it's going to get tangled, and you're going to spend 10 minutes of your life properly wrapping that cable. So it's just, it looks unsightly to have big coils of cable lurking around.
Go ahead, Todd. Not Todd. Todd, we're going to call Todd because the next question is for Todd, and we're hoping that he hears us and appears magically because we can see him here. He's around here somewhere. All right, next question.
Next question, where Stan Chan has a Ableton Live versus Pro Tools question. And he said, in which scenarios would you choose one over the other?
Okay.
I just threw it to you because I was like,
fantastic.
We've invoked the spirit.
Do you have any opinions?
Absolutely. Ableton Live, both Ableton and Live and Pro Tools are DAWs. They are digital audio workstations. Pro Tools is the standard of the industry. And we were having a big conversation this morning about in After Hours with Manolo and Mickey about how with film and with industry-based stuff, Pro Tools is so integrated with so many things. You can run multiple instances across all sorts of things, and it is the standard. So that's where I would use that, is in a recording studio, which is also a place for collaborating with lots of other other musicians through mixing and whatever. And Ableton Live, for me, is my ultimate creative digital audio workstation. I would not use Pro Tools to get down ideas and edit them really quickly. That's not what I would do. Ableton Live, put ideas in, arrange them just like clockwork, super quickly, with great effects that are all built in, really light on the CPU. So it's like, that's, you know, Pro Tools is a production machine. You can use Ableton Live as a production machine. I made my entire record in Ableton Live. You can use it that way, but it's the two use case scenarios are super different. I hope I've given you some of that, but happy to elaborate in a second hour on that, or in after hours on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the way we've seen it happen is that when we're doing a live event and it's using Pro Tools, it's very pre-planned. Like, we're using Pro Tools, but there's a lot of automation that's already been built in. There's a lot of things that there, and we're driving usually to a click track. We're driving from with time code. Where, you know, there's something there's kind of rails that Pro Tools is on, and it's much more of a post production. Even when it's at live, you're doing it in post and then expressing it live. Whereas where we see Ableton Live be used more is responsive, dynamic, you know, doing things while you're in the show. And I don't know if Todd, if you agree with that, but it seems like that they both do live, but one leans towards, I'm going to create something that's going to work from a post-production perspective. And the other one is really, I'm doing this right now, and you can change things and move things and so on and so forth. Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Ableton Live could be used in place of QLab.
Right.
And yet, it does not have a time code sync thing built into it like Pro Tools does, right? So it's like it's not as great for film as Pro Tools is, or Cubase or Digital Performer. Yep. Not as great. So because it doesn't have that particular integration. So exactly what you said, Alex, I believe as well. Yeah.
Next question.
However, I got to say, they use Ableton Live on Kanye's set. They use Ableton Live.
Well, there is a way to get time code into it, because I know that we work with artists that have time code. It's just a little bit of it's always like, oh, they've got Ableton Live and we have to figure this out. Like, it's never like and then we'll plug it in. It does get done. It's just that it doesn't get done smoothly. You know,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is back with what happens when you run Zoom rooms on a machine with more than 3 displays. What gets displayed on monitors 4 and above?
I don't know. I've never tried that. I know that we know that it's 3, so we never have plugged in more than 3, because there's no way to, you know, we don't know what would happen over there. You're talking about, you know, the end of the world. We just think it just drops off somewhere into space. I guess the only way to know is to test it. So yeah, we expect a report back on what happened when you went into the Netherlands of Zoom. Next question.
The right comment would be, there be monsters here.
Yeah, exactly.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, when a theater group presents a play that they have rented from a script rental house, do they usually provide suggested lighting and sound designs, or do they leave that entirely up to the individual group?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'd like to get my sound and lighting designs copyrighted along with it and sell it to them too.
Go ahead, Flock.
Yeah, so no, the answer is definitely no, because they're not in the business of keeping the rights of designers. So what ends up happening is sometimes there may be a video component that was part of the show originally that you get the rights to, but none of the lighting, none of the scenic design, none of the costume design go along with the rights to the script.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Resources that different theaters have and the venues that they have are so totally different and way across the board. There's no, you could maybe have a suggestion. The notes may say the scene opens in a kitchen. What that kitchen is left up to the local group.
Go ahead. Next question.
George E. Kennedy, our friend here on the panel, says, out of Washington, D.C., season 2 on Apple TV Plus is back tonight. Will you be tuning in for the visuals?
Go ahead, George.
I just thought I'd put in a random question. It's a great show, but well produced. Apple is kind of slow in development. Well, me personally think they're not going to be a next Netflix, but they're slow in development. I just hope they can ramp this up soon, because that $30 a month, you know, is not an easy penny to be paying.
And Tony?
I am not going to watch it. I am going to wait until the episodes build up, and I'm going to binge watch.
Yeah. I'm afraid that there's very few that I did get caught up in the Disney thing and watching them. It became like a Friday thing that we did. So I kind of get it, but I don't want to encourage them. So I stopped doing it because I was like, if I do this, then we'll go back to this weekly hell that we used to live in when we were, for those of us old enough to remember getting something coming out once a week. It's just not something I'm that interested in returning to. I also find that for me, as a parent, I think I was excited that I thought that, it's Apple. It'll be stuff that I can watch with my kids, and like half of what Apple puts out, I can't watch with my kids. And so if I can't watch it with my kids, it doesn't really exist. So it's the only time I sit down on the TV. So I think that's a challenge for me. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, up next with why is the spell check in Chrome not as good as the spell check in Google itself with its "did you mean" suggestions?
This is one of the great mysteries of our life, of our lifetime. I find so many times I can't remember how to spell something, and I have to go out to Google. I just pop open Google, and I'm like, how does it know? Like I wasn't that far off, and it spells it correctly, and Apple can't get it right, and Chrome can't get it right, and you're like, how is this so hard? Go ahead, Jonas.
Exactly what I thought.
Yeah, it wasn't that hard. Like, it's dumb. Anyway, go ahead, Jonas.
It's a different algorithm because it uses heuristics, and on the most easiest level, it uses something like a Levenstein distance that can tell you how far apart from other popular searches you are, and then basically serving up the search that is closest to your hash value. So because it's searching, it can do a lot of stuff, but using the search algorithm would, for your sentences, would suggest that every sentence that you will ever type already have been typed by other people.
Next question.
Rupert McRae again, and he says this time, any experiences on the panel with running Zoom rooms and a regular Zoom client on the same machine and running them at the same time?
I have to admit that I just never consider that an option. I just don't, I'm always like, every computer has its own connection. Go ahead, Jonas.
I do that from time to time. I have a Zoom room on my local desktop if I need to test stuff, and I just Alt-Tab out of the stuff, and then sometimes I forget I'm still on a Zoom room, but it works.
Good, Greg.
I'd say that's a little tricky to do just because of the nature of Zoom rooms. Zoom rooms tend to just take over the machine completely, and it's really hard to kind of manipulate back and forth between apps when you're in one.
Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears, and we are moving over. Tony Mobley, of course, has conversations with Tony Mobley on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Tony started just putting together the show. And Tony, can you give us a little bit of background? Like, what was the impetus, and how did it evolve?
So Conversation with Tony Mobley started as actually an effort to do some community activism and to have conversations in the community. And I reached out to a lot of office hour members to help me try to figure it out. Yeah. And so what ended up happening was the person that we were trying to work with decided that they didn't want to participate in this office hours experiment and lab. And so as I had been reaching out to different individuals to help me with the project, they kept saying to me, you need to have your own show. You need to have your own conversation. You need to, to share your thoughts and the things that you think are important. And so I said, well, initially what I'll do is I'll do something to help this small community of house of worship that I work with their technology, because they're elderly, and I've wanted to put together things that I got from office hours to help them get better. And what ended up happening, the show actually took on a different spirit. It turned into a conversation with individuals. So now I say the conversation with Tony Mobley is actually about interviewing interesting people, getting to know who they are, and then we throw in a little bit of technology to actually inform the conversation. So that's kind of what it is in a nutshell.
And and it's been really interesting. We had this idea, and we were just trying to figure it out. Where, hey, let's just grab folks from our community and start interviewing them. And Tony took it on. So Tony is kind of grabbing a lot of folks that we've seen in our community and interviewing them. And now it did take another turn, which is that it went from being just something done on Zoom to something that started to move into the cloud. Can you tell us how that happened?
I think Guy should tell how that happened.
Go ahead, Guy.
Sure. Over the last few months, Jonas and I have kind of been playing in the background. We've taken even this show and brought it into the cloud. Just behind the scenes, we were running even 4K, pushing it to live stream. And so we got into Zoom rooms and figuring out how we can do NDI. Before the official version came out, we were just screen scraping and pushing from one instance into another instance, and getting an idea as to how the looks would look like. What would it look like with boxes, and how does gallery view look? And then when we saw Tony's show, we were just like, we both agreed like we could help him. We were like, man, he needs help. And what a perfect guy to, help out. He's not trying to, be Mr. Ego. He's just like a great guy in the community, and he's helping out, and we wanted to help him. So, and it's a safe place for us to fail if we blow the whole thing up. It's like, how do we get out of this? So talk about backups. There's ways that we could even make this so that we kind of disappear, like our whole infrastructure. If we wanted to, we could just make it so that we just push back to YouTube and fail over. But Chriag's really the guy behind the scenes, because he's doing this all the time with a nonprofit. And so out of necessity, he developed a system which I was super intrigued with when I first saw it. And he let me in with his team and kind of figure out how the Stream Deck orientation worked, because some of the team that he's using doesn't even know vMix at all. And that's the interesting thing, as you see, is we'll move through this. So we're going to break this up into 3 parts. Jonas will go first with the cloud infrastructure. Chriag will step in with the vMix setup and the tunneling in with the companion. And then I'll do some of the behind the scenes and show you guys kind of how I was cutting behind the scenes with an entire whole other system. So Jonas, you want to go ahead and take it?
Yes, so we used, I have a little diagram. We used 3 Zoom Room instances to pipe in up to 9 different people over Zoom Room's NDI with ISO audio, which has the nice effect that if Tony is getting excited a little bit more than the rest of the panel, we can tune down just Tony a little bit, which we really enjoyed. Then we have a small little VPN server on my cloud instances, so that as soon as all the people that help log onto the VPN server, all of the cloud infrastructure looks to them like local, so they can use their companion, they can use the local IP addresses to log in. And then because we didn't had SRT inputs, we didn't need a third vMix instance for ingest. But what we did use is we had one vMix instance, a 4x large for the production. So on this instance, we produced everything that was the instance that Chriag and Marcus lived on. And then I was the person checking the encode. And encode just takes in an NDI stream from the production machine and then streams it out. But we also have failover and then encode machine. So while the guys were still prepping on production, we could already go live with a holding slide and music from encode. I have a diagram how that looks. I have a screenshot of how that looks in my AWS. We have these 6 different instances here in AWS. I copied that we then start. And then during the show, I'm just looking at all of these diagrams to see problems before they arise. This is a backend of the Zoom. So I'm always looking, what are they using? Are they connected? Are they wired or over Wi-Fi? Then this is an AWS graph. You actually see when we test it, and then when we stop test it till the show, and then you see all the different people coming in, because this is the network traffic on the different instances. what we were sending out. This is, you see, as soon as we pin the person, it goes up. So we can actually see the different Zoom pins. And then this is another important view in Zoom, where I just was monitoring the audio and video all the time. So as soon as we had a dropout, I could either verify if it's in our production system or if it's on Zoom. So I could let the guys know, hey, let's cut out of the panel view, let's cut into a 2 or 3 up or into a full screen so we can hide the person that has connection issues. That's the one for audio, and then there's also one for video sending and receiving. So we could always know if the panelists' connection is fine. And that's all the diagrams that I looked up doing the show. And other than that, that's a basic infrastructure. And one of the cool parts is this is a system that I and Chriag worked on for like almost a year now with scripts and different little tools that we now have it automated. And we were able to deploy the whole infrastructure in 24 hours. It took us about 2 hours to bring it up from nothing on AWS to that exact setup. And it's pretty cheap also. We're not using Teradici anymore. We use Parsec for remote access. So everybody can just jump in, and I'm in over nice TCP for multi-monitor support.
That's great.
Yeah, so the fast thing there that he's talking about is what happens in 22 minutes. We're installing vMix, we're installing Zoom, we're installing VB audio cables. All this is happening automatically, because before what was happening was we would forget one thing and we'd get, oh, did you forget to flip the firewall? Did you forget to flip this privacy camera thing? And so there's so many little settings. And so our script just goes and just does all this in 22 minutes. So it's a huge time saver. And again, why would we want to do this in the first place? Because the look that you get. So, you know, when you hit go live in here in Zoom, you're pushing out a 720p signal with limited pinning ability to do a 2-up or a 3-up. And then also you don't really get, well, you get the Zoom logo as well that's stuck down at the bottom. So there's a couple things going on as to why we want to take over control. We're getting a 1080p or up to 4K if we want. That's coming, pushing the guys super hard to get 4K. Because then you can get two 1920s side by side, two HD side by side, and it looks gorgeous. I mean, when you get a guest and an interviewer side by side, it looks amazing. So you want to go ahead and go to some questions, Alex, or you want to go?
Let's go do a quick overview. So let's go to Chriag. Let's go around and cover the overview, and then we'll go into the questions.
Okay, great. So, you know, one other thing that I'd like to add is what was amazing about this was a conversation in after hours. And it was just us chatting with Tony, you know, around what was he was doing. And Jonas and I were having a chat, and Jonas was like, this would be fun. And this was 24 hours before the show. And then we said, let's do it. So, you know, as Guy said, we spun up the machines. We got everything set up. What we did, so what we did is we spun up vMix, and I went in there and I created a template. And a lot of what we do is, you know, we've got Stream Deck profiles and everything already set up, ready to go. So we imported everything there, and we did a Stream Deck profile. I was able to send that to Marcus, and Marcus only met 48 hours before we went live. So that was pretty amazing. You know, he just got it, which was really, really cool. And that's the other great thing about our setup with the vMix and in the cloud. What we're doing is we can just send someone a profile and say, all you need is Parsec. You need this VPN that Jonas can provide the key for. I'll send you a companion profile, and you can now switch a show anywhere in the world. So, you know, Marcus was in Trinidad switching the actual show. We have Jonas managing all of the infrastructure and communicating with all the panelists in Germany. We've got myself in Dallas, you know, Texas, you know, making some calls. And then Ken in the UK actually in real time sending us graphics and edits that we needed to make. And we were actually changing them on the fly during the show. So, I mean, that's the power of the cloud. And that's, you know, another thing which is real powerful. So we were 3 continents, 4 countries within 24 hours of, you know, making this decision. So what we did is, so I'll quickly show you on my screen. This is what our companion looked like. So I had one page and Marcus had a second page. So basically, he was able to really quickly just, map his buttons, just move buttons around the way he needed. And we were just able to call the shots. And then so I was doing play out of certain things, started the show and things like that. And he was just switching between all of the different scenes and everything that we had. And one thing that we wanted to do was, because it was such a quick turnaround, we didn't want to ruffle any feathers or make any drastic changes. So what we tried to do is try and take what was already existing with the webinar and pull out what we could and, put a nice little skin over the top, basically. So we did not have a return feed. We did nothing like that inside the webinar itself. So for week one, what we did was we took ISOs and then we brought that in. So here's an example of Tlalik and Tony and the 2-up that we had. And then, we had the 3-up when Todd came in when he was asking questions. And then for week one, like I said, we didn't want to make too many changes. So the panel shot looked very, very basic. It was just a screen scrape. But then what we did from there is, we took a lot of feedback, which was really great. So we started getting a lot of feedback from people saying, well, why don't you tweak this? Why don't you do that? So we made a few changes. We added in some lower thirds for the second week. Our 2-up stayed the same. We had a brand new panelist view, and we can dynamically change this to however many panelists we have. So if we have 9 panelists, we can bring in 9 ISOs there. And then Chris Fenwick came in, 2 hours before that first show, and he goes, well, it'll be cool to have a cool little, closing slide. So, so all these little suggestions and all of these little tips and after hours came in really handy, and we started building out the show. So that's, and so what we did the first week, we had mixed audio, we had basic gallery, and, we just had active speaker for each of the panelists. So the second week, we actually started tweaking a bit more. So we had the new gallery view, like I showed you there. We had ISO audio. And then the other thing we did is we actually moved our panelists into their own Zoom meeting. And then the webinar was actually the return feed from our full vMix setup. So they could actually see the show. So, incremental improvements. And then obviously, week 3, we've actually taken some learnings from that as well. So we plan to, keep moving forward and making changes from there.
It's really exciting. And a lot of people say, well, how do we have these events start to become more successful for clients to get it? This is how we do that. Taking what you guys are doing and finding a place where people are willing to let us experiment, whether it's, I think this one, Mad in the Kitchen, the Project Belfast, these are all things where we're experimenting in places that people are willing to let us and really breaking new ground. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, from a behind the scenes perspective, you can kind of see, I'll flip over to some slides here that we put together. The first one, you can see kind of the machines behind it all. You've got Trinidad with the vMix machine. You've got a Dell machine running VMware, SRT mini server, Zoom rooms. And then you've got us coming in. I was coming in from the US into that SRT mini server with my behind the scenes over the shoulder shot. We had these Zoom rooms with Germany and UK coming in. Then that went NDI over to the vMix station, NDI over to back into Zoom. And then I had a real simple interface. So in vMix, you can do a web browser. It's really, really rudimentary remote switching, but anybody could do this. I mean, literally it's just a URL and you just give it to somebody and they can see the thumbnails and they can cut. So this is how we were able to do this behind the scenes, which was kind of meta because you could see here's Chriag's hand. So he's running the Stream Deck in Dallas. So this is just the wildest thing to watch this. So keep in mind where everybody's at on these different continents. As I hit play here, so I was cutting from Chriag's hand, and then we would go over to Jonas's Stream Deck. He wasn't doing anything at that time. This was just a demo, but I wanted to speed it up. Here's Marcus's Stream Deck. So here is that Stream Deck that you saw Chriag's emulator that's it in the real world with the show there running on vMix on the right side. And then he's got a Zoom room in front of him. And then he also had an over the shoulder of him. So I'd cut to this shot every once in a while, and we could see Ken in the UK, and then back over to me. And I was just monitoring again. I had in the top left here, I had my vMix thumbnails that I was cutting from in a web browser, cutting on Trinidad's vMix, Marcus's machine. I was monitoring the YouTube. I was in as an attendee over here. And then I was also we were using after hours as comms and interacting with George and some of the other folks that were watching. We had Bo in as well. And so we were able to, at first it was very quiet because we also have another back channel with Unity, which I'll show in a second. So the audio chain looked like this. So in fact, Jonas, you want to go into a little bit more on this behind the scenes audio? You know more about it.
This is a really interesting thing because it's one of the things that I developed with Jim doing Mad in the Kitchen. Because what we wanted to hear is have the program as layer one, and then on top of that, the comms that duck the program. But what we then also added in this iteration is if somebody speaks in the breakout room, it ducks both. So people can always speak over comms and program because both ducks down. And this was basically it. Marcus was getting over Unity intercom. He was getting our Unities. He had a Zoom room with after hours, and then over Parsec, I was piping him the program feed. So he could all put that together in a little ESS 806 mix.
And where was the 806?
In Trinidad.
Oh, very cool. The 806 has become super useful for a lot of us. I think we have two of them now to put that together. I think we're. Do we have anything else you guys want to cover before we? Is there more slides? Before
Maybe
we go to
Ken wants to show the interface that he used to upload graphics.
Yep.
Yeah. So Jonas made a interface into his AWS server, which I think I am showing. Can't see when I'm doing this. Oh,
yeah, we
okay,
see
it's coming
it.
up. Okay, yeah. So here's where I uploaded the graphics for the show. And as we said on the fly, we forgot to put Todok's name in, so we added that, and that was the new end credit, and that was done about 20 minutes before the end slide needed to come up. But yeah, with this interface, so I could create the slides in. I used Affinity to create my graphics, save them, upload them to here, and they were on the AWS server.
And this is a 3 bucket that automatically is mounted to all of our AWS instances. That's one of the things that Chriag and I worked on with our script. So you just have a drive called S, and that's the production S3 bucket, and it automatically pulls in all the files that get uploaded. So Chriag could actually go into the vMix instance, and that was one of the cool things to see. Like we had handovers all the time during the show, like at least 10 to 20. Because as soon as Chriag needed to update the graphic, there was like a short call, going into vMix. Marcus was cutting still because we have it with the Stream Deck and not with a mouse. He could update it and then just went back again, and Marcus could take over the full control again. It's really cool to see that working.
It's amazing. It's really cool. Anything else before we jump into questions? All right, let's jump into the questions, Bill.
The first one comes from George Kennedy Jr. in Washington, D.C., and he asks, are the Stream Deck and BitFocus companions helping the team how are they helping the team to execute the show?
Go ahead, Chriag.
So for us, it's a huge advantage. So, in this production, especially because we've got people around the world, literally. So in order, all we do is just send a profile. Like I said earlier, with a VPN, just send them a companion profile. And then Marcus, within minutes, because he knows companion, he knows the Stream Deck, he was able to switch the show. So there was no extra training that we needed to do. It was just make sure that all the buttons work for him, and he understood, how we map the buttons. So, and the great thing about that is we're building in redundancy. So if for any reason he had an issue, we could easily, I could take over the show instantly.
George?
Thank you, Chriag. I just wanted you to comment on that, because we talked about this on the back end, that we're becoming so dependent on the companion and the Stream Deck right now to do a lot of things, so I just wanted to get your input. We talked about the new version that's coming up and the drawbacks of it. So I just wanted to get an idea of what your process and moving forward, how that's going to be integrated.
Yeah. Greg?
Yeah, and just for the folks who maybe aren't familiar with Companion or using a Stream Deck in production, the real advantage of it is it makes everything push button, and you can actually stack commands on top of one button. So you can punch one button and have 5, 6, 7, 8 different things happen all at once. So it's if you're not using Companion and a Stream Deck and you're a vMix user, you need to get on that like right now, because you're going to kick yourself for not. When I started out with it, I started with just the Stream Deck software, and I was hesitant to jump into Companion because I thought it was just another learning curve. And once I got into Companion, I just thumped myself for not having done it sooner, because it is so, like, just being able to stack the commands and copy and paste, it's just so much more efficient.
Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the cool things that Chriag does with his specific deployment is that all the commands are synced, because we have a Cloud Companion instance, and you're not triggering directly stuff on the vMix instance, but on the Cloud instance. So if we would have more than just Marcus cutting, their Stream Deck doesn't have to change. But if we notice, like, if you click this button, we're on the wrong scene, Chriag can change it on the fly, and it would happen to everybody. And one of the important things with Companion in this instance is, if Companion would have crashed, we would have still been able to run the show, because it's not queuing a lot. It's pretty basic for this show what it does. And if anything major happens, I was always manually in the encode instance. And we had a slide ready with music to fade over to just give us 2 minutes to fix stuff.
Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael. And Douglas says, how did you handle communications during the show?
Jonas?
So we had Unity Comms. And what I do is we have Unity Comms client on the Zoom room. So the Zoom room is feeding in over a virtual audio cable, feeding in its sound into Unity and my sound into the Zoom room. So on Unity, I just have a second PL called Zoom room. And I was the only person allowed to speak on that one, but I could talk to Tony directly without needing to be on the meeting, which is super useful in that use case.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again, and this time he asks, what specific cloud platform did you use, and how did the participants send video to vMix?
Jonas?
We are using AWS for this use case on G4DN instances. We use Zoom on the two Zoom rooms NDI with ISO audio on two G4DN 2XL instances with our script, so it's a really optimized instance. There's a lot of small things that, like, we hammered on the script for a year. There's a lot of small instances that we do, like stuff like turning off that there isn't anything blocking the screen, or like notifications or anything. But that's everybody comes in over Zoom at the moment.
Next question.
From JHB in New York, what has been the biggest differences to remote production of conversations versus the entire crew being on site? And what have been the pluses and minuses? Thanks.
Go ahead, Tony.
I'm going to let them answer first.
Okay, sure.
So, the great thing is, so one of the advantages of being on site is you can actually see the talent, and then you can interact with them directly. So one challenge that we face being remote is, how much interaction and how much do you push back to the view that the panelists see? So do we do a return feed? Are we always in their ear with comms and things like that? So there are a lot of the challenges you have to consider when you're working remotely, because you can't physically see them. So, when you're in person, you can obviously hold up cue cards or give them small cues like that. So I would say that's probably one of the big challenges working remote.
Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the things, if you would compare to a panel discussion in like the real life, I think the conversation wouldn't be as smooth and intimate as if we would have like a big return feed, or like there's a big stage and people watching, because for the panelists, it's just a Zoom meeting. They never notice anything of the production. We take your Zoom meeting and make it look good and produce it into the webinar. And I think the conversation this time was even better with people not like thinking too much about the webinar and just having an honest conversation. And that's our goal, not get the tech between the people, but use the tech to remove distance and like problems between people to let them connect.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I mean, what you lose in remote production versus on-site is you lose control. And we get spoiled here in office hours because pretty much everybody we deal with is our media professionals, media production professionals. So everybody tends to come in with a good camera, good lighting, and good audio. But when you're dealing with sort of day-to-day, average folks, you don't always get that. And so you tend to sometimes have to make do with what you get. So I would say, being able to have that on-site control where you can control camera, audio, lighting, it's a big plus. Whereas a lot of times when I'm doing remote production, it's sometimes harrowing because of the lack of control over so many things that I have.
Yeah. Tony?
The plus is that the team made sure that the content of Conversation with Tony Mobley stayed intact. Their advice to me was, do what you do. You don't have to worry about this at all. Have your conversation, have your interaction. We will handle it, and there is no risk. And so I'm thankful, and I just wanted to share that.
I think one of the big advantages of as we continue to virtualize production is that we have people all in how many continents? 2 or 3 continents working on this seamlessly. And as we continue to get better at that, we can now find availability and skill sets all over the world and seamlessly tie them all together. And that's incredibly powerful. I mean, there's just so many times where we're trying to fill a position in Dallas or fill a position in, Kansas. And it's just like, okay, well, who do I find? And your Rolodex becomes very important. Now the Rolodex is global and it's all online. Next question.
George E. Kennedy Jr. is back from Washington, D.C. asking, what's the VPN setup allowing the Conversations with Tony Mobley team to connect across the globe?
Go ahead, Jonas.
I use Pre-Tunnel, which is a server that works on the OpenVPN standard. I specifically choose the OpenVPN standard because it's, for me, with having multiple clients, there's an app called OpenVPN Connect, and I have 5 different VPN servers in all the clients' VPCs, so in their cloud. I can just flick a switch and I'm connected. It's really amazing how fast it works, and I had never had an issue of like it not working on anything. We put the same VPN on all our tablets, so I can have remote control of the Zoom rooms. And why I don't use the AWS VPNs is they are a lot more expensive because you need to run them 24/7. And what I actually do is all my remote access to the instances also go through the VPN. So my instances get more and more secure because I can wall them off completely from the outer internet. And as soon as I shut my VPN down, in the breakout room, you always notice it because Chriag gets out of the meeting and Marcus gets kicked out of the meeting because everything is silent then. And also nobody can access my machines anymore. So it's a security thing and also works really well. And it's like 5 cents per month for me right now to run it.
Good, Greg.
What Jonas mentioned earlier that they had switched over to Parsec from Teradici, and I think it's important to note that the reason for switching over to Parsec is because Parsec allows you to have multiple users interact with the system, whereas Teradici, you can only have one login at a time. So using Parsec was really key to being able to have multiple producers on the stream. So Marcus could cut and Chriag could be on the same machine and change the graphics, and Jonas could change the pins. And so it was Parsec that allowed him to do that.
Go ahead, George.
So I think one of the beauties of office hours and what we're doing, I like to hear Jonas's point of view. Obviously, he's a developer, and me as an end user, it gives me an understanding of more of what he's doing. I might not be able to produce the VPN that he's doing, but there's AWS VPN client, there's LogMeIn, which can help you out in certain ways, but it's not him being able to shut down that VPN. I mean, literally, as soon as the show was over, he just kicked them all out with one switch. So it's good to understand all these processes and what is available. What I would say is listen to what these guys have to say and then kind of research it and get an idea of what is happening. Because as we move into the cloud, you're going to have an understanding what a VPC is and what is all it's doing.
Well, and the goal also is to also remember that you don't have to learn it all. One of the things we're all figuring this out. Then you have people you can hire that will make this go away. You don't have to do it all yourself either. I mean, we want to learn as much as you can, but you also want to look at, we have folks here that are really figuring this stuff out. And what we want to do, what I would recommend if I was doing a real event that needs to work, is you hire the people. And again, what we're able to do here is fail, and not fail badly, but just fail, like we can test things. We can push things down the path in a way that we can't innovate during massive productions. But what you end up with is a set of skill sets. We know that different people here know how to do different pieces of this puzzle. My recommendation is to use them, learn it as best you can, but don't try to become an expert at all of these things. The cool thing about this is that we're getting to know the experts within our group within specific verticals. Next question.
And George Kennedy has not one, but two more of the top rated questions this morning, including this one. Guy, how did you tie together in real time the behind the scenes of all the show crew in Trinidad, Seattle, Germany, Dallas, and the UK?
Really, that's Marcus that put this all together. I mean, this is his system. This is not in the cloud. This was actually a boots on the ground. His machine, that Dell that you see down in the bottom, is physically in Trinidad. But what you're looking at here is the future. I mean, using Zoom or SRT mini server as the contribution method. So it's how do you get your video into the cloud or into another location? So in this case, we're using something everybody knows, Zoom. And so the Zoom room is how we're pulling NDI into these systems. And then this could be more elegant with the remote switching with the interface that I was using in this one. Of course, I could tie in a Stream Deck and do some other things, but this is the system is just SRT mini server, Zoom rooms, NDI into a vMix machine, and then picking up through a web browser the ability to cut with just a touch screen interface that had the thumbnails.
Go, Jonas.
Yeah, so one of the interesting parts was that we still used his local deployment just because he had it ready, and we was a last minute thing that we wanted to tie it all together. And we sadly don't have a BSS 806 in the cloud yet. That would be really cool.
Yeah,
I love the 806 when we worked with it on Jim's system. It's amazing. And that was basically the 806 brought me down to local for that use case.
Okay, go ahead, George.
Quickly, nothing tells the story better than watching these guys actually cut the show in the BTS. I think it was beautifully done. Kudos to you guys, man.
Next question.
And is back from George again. And he says, Chriag and Jonas, you are both show callers in your own rights. How do you prevent stepping on each other during conversations with Tony Mobley?
Go ahead, Chriag.
So that was actually an interesting conversation we just had yesterday, how it was just so fluid. We didn't really talk about roles. It kind of just happened. Jonas had the infrastructure set, so we just let him run with that. Marcus and I had been talking about vMix, and then we just kind of collaborated on what we were going to do. And then during the show, it just kind of happened naturally. So there wasn't really any major discussion. We just kind of, fell into those roles.
Go ahead, Jonas.
And it worked great.
Yeah, and revisiting what we did it was really interesting because I basically brought in the show start and the show end. And then as soon as we got it started, I only interfered when we had problems. I give head ups like, hey, I see packet drops. As soon as you see something, be ready to cut. If I notice, I was monitoring the program stream, so I was giving directions for the audio. And if we had an issue on the program stream, and Chriag was just enhancing what Marcus did with like comments about because you don't have the peace of mind if you're clicking buttons. It's really nice when Chriag can just have an overview and look at everything and help.
Go ahead, George.
So watching it from the back end, watching Chriag and Jonas interact, Marcus pretty much had the final call, but those guys were kind of visually looking at everything that was going on. But it was good to see them 1, 2, 3, and they had each other's back the whole time, and they all had their roles they were playing. They didn't step on each other, and sometimes they might have not necessarily missed something, but Marcus always had his eye on the final panel, and those guys were able to give their comments and any issues that came up. It was good to watch them work as three people cut in the same program.
Yeah. Next question.
Stan Chan in Roseville's up next. If you had to replace the vMix instance with an alternative, what would be the MVP for the feature set?
Go ahead, Jonas.
I would say cutting between inputs. Audio is something you can handle outside, but it would be nice to be able to merge the audio so you don't have to split it before the MVP and after, bring it in after MVP again. And one of the features that we really like in vMix is the multi-viewer. So we can have 9 different videos and then a background or something on top. That would be an MVP, basically.
Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, what would you estimate the per episode cost to be for the entire cloud production?
I don't know if anybody knows yet.
I just looking at my cost dashboard, which is always a bit weird because I have a lot of stuff running, but it looks like around $30 for the whole show.
Well, for the hardware,
yeah,
for the people, and the production, a lot of these are, they're absurdly high because we're throwing a lot more people at it than most clients will pay for, but I think that that's going to catch up. So I think that as we figure out how to build these as clean shows and people start to see what's possible, I talk a lot about action occurs when possibility is greater than circumstance. When they see bad Zooms or they see rough productions, they only want to spend $10 on it. When they start to see shows that look really refined, like what we're building with Tony and what's being put there, this actually, the money is there to spend on it. It is that they don't see the possibility of it yet, like that it really will look like a show, and they just see it as another Zoom or another, virtual event or another whatever. And so what's really important here is that not only are we learning, but we're proving the model and we're selling the idea that you could have a great show that's actually worth watching online. And I think Tony's doing a great job of getting the content sorted out. That's the hardest part. Like we can figure this all out, but you need live content. You need someone up there, creating that content and as a context for everything else to be experimented with. So, and I think that we're going to see the same thing as we move to the next version of office hours, as Tony's show continues to expand, as we see Project Belfast, as we get into other projects that we're experimenting. We're throwing way more labor at it than you would normally put into one of these events, but only because clients haven't seen what's possible yet. Eventually, we're going to see those budgets, build up because the budgets were there when they were doing it physically, and these are arguably going to have higher ROI than physical at some point, when we actually make it great. So that's why I'm so excited about what's happening. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Have you had issues with installing Zoom rooms on a cloud instance? It seems to be designed for physical rooms, not cloud instances.
Go ahead, Jonas.
We had issues, but with the whole thing, it's the instances were engineered for over a year. There are a lot of little tweaks, and the Zoom room just needs a really well thought out system that is well engineered. Yeah.
Next question.
Next question comes from Lou Perez in Queen Creek, Arizona. Lou asks, what sort of redundancy have you built into this setup?
I go ahead, Jonas.
So I always split the workload between production and encode. Looking at I have one diagram that I always look at after show. None of our instance ever hit over 60% of usage. That's the mark where as soon as it goes over that, I split the instances. And the encode instance was always ready to fail over. So if the production instance goes down, I can just click a button. We have music and a nice graphic. So it's not like the show is black, we're just showing black or something. It's a nice failover. And also one of the things that if you work with software is we would have been ready for disaster recovery. So as soon as the encode goes down, it takes me about 1 minute to recover from that because we need to put in the stream key is ready to be put into the production instance, and we could fail over to that because we are not running it at 100%. There is this margin built in for like something isn't working or something needs to be done. And the encode machines it's a real easy machine that it's a 2XL for just encoding. It's running at 10%. And if that one fails, you have bigger problems at the moment.
Chriag.
just to add to that, so, we've got the two vMix machines for the encoding and the processing, but we also have failover in terms of the Stream Decks, because the way we've set everything up, if Marcus's Stream Deck goes down, I can automatically take over. Also, if Companion goes down, we've got Parsec up, and we can start controlling vMix directly without having to, worry about that. So we have a lot of redundancy built into that process.
Right, go ahead, guys.
Oh yeah, and one of the things is my internet went down during the show.
And we kept going.
Nobody noticed.
Yeah.
But because we have failover.
Yeah, so if we had a little bit more budget for this, I was going to fire up an entire duplicate system that was a basic screen scraper and go into RTMPB. That way, if the whole thing just went down, we could just say flip to B, or we wouldn't have to say it. It would fail over in a frame, just boom, and then we're back to the way the show looked from the get-go. It's just like nothing happened.
Yeah. Next question.
Rupert McRae's up next from Dallas, Texas, and he says, is a production of this quality dependent on having access to 1080p in Zoom?
I mean, I think that you could go to 720p with a Zoom room, and just put it in, the Zoom rooms themselves will be 720p. And so you could get some quality. It's much higher quality at 1080p, but I don't think it's necessary to make this work. Go ahead, Jonas.
The panel could actually work in 720p because in the panel you have smaller boxes and a lot of them. So you get more resolution out of that, because if you have 5 720p, you can do one 1080p. But for the full ups, it wouldn't look as great. Yeah, we really like the 1080p of Zoom.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Guy, you talked about using After Hours as the communication platform. Wouldn't Unity-only comms have been better so as not to interfere with others in After Hours?
Go ahead, Chriag.
Yes.
Go for it, Guy.
So we started out with Unity, so we're communicating that way, and then we're actually piping the comms back into After Hours. But as soon as we're kind of level-headed, like 20 minutes into the show, we just started talking through the Zoom breakout room. So because we were listening to what other people were saying as well in the breakout room. So usually I don't think we would do that, because we could just concentrate on what we're doing and not care, especially as it grows out. And if there's like 100 people in that breakout room, we don't really want to listen to that while we're trying to concentrate. But yeah, the whole thing was running on Unity, and then we're ducking, as you saw in the diagram, how it looked. But yeah, the Unity was running Dante into that BSS 806.
Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman says, did the addition of a cloud production change the thematic direction of the show?
I want to start with Tony.
So the thematic did not change from the cloud production. One of the points that the team made clearly was that they wanted me to continue to have the conversations, the interaction with the people that I have been having. And so thematically, it didn't change. But what I will say is that I am getting a lot of responses since the cloud production has started. I'm getting a lot of people asking about appearing on Conversation with Tony Mobley. I am getting a lot of feedback from people who are doing production events and asking questions. And so there is a lot of what I call interest in the shiny. So I call what the production team is doing as the shiny, and there's a lot of hype about that. The good thing for me about it is allowing me to have the conversations with the people at a wider audience. And so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, you don't want it to have, form take over function, but when you have the conversation, when you have the content figured out and it's functionally great, making it look nice definitely changes the playing field. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, and on that, making it look nice, quote, Tony didn't have a logo because I had no time to make one. So because they were going to go live 24 hours before, so I had to make Tony's logo and kind of polish more the graphics. So it gave me a impetus to get Tony a good branding to start with anyway.
Absolutely. Jeff?
I think as the guest on the show this week, it made it much easier to have an honest, intimate conversation because it stripped away technical needs on the people who are on the panel. It stripped away us having to look at the webinar. Talok was reading questions, but I never saw them. I never saw voting on the questions. Wasn't watching the YouTube or anything. So for Tony and I and the other people on the panel, we were just able to talk. And that really, I think, enhanced his theme, is the conversations, having all of that stripped out and done on the cloud.
It's one of the big challenges is for everyone in the conversation to be present. And, when you can spread it out to other people managing it, it allows the host, it allows the guests to be more present. Go ahead, Jonas.
And just hearing Jeff say that it was easier for him means a lot for me, because one of my things, if I work as a technician with great content, one of the things that I love to do is take away brain cycles from the talent that they need to think about anything. I want the talent to be focused on being the talent. And I think the thematic change that it might help, Tony not needing to think about how do I do that? Is somebody cutting? Do I need to manage questions? Is Tony can focus on the conversations. And there are some conversations that might not be as easy to be had. But if you have like all your brain power to consider the conversation and just have an intimate conversation, I think you can take more themes that you might not want to take if you have to focus on other things. That's one of the focus that we want. We don't want to enable Tony to have a better conversation.
Absolutely. Greg?
In some of the meetings that I sat in, there was a lot of discussion about not wanting to change the flavor of the show. And, in the end, the technology shouldn't detract from the conversation. It should only enhance the conversation. It should wrap it up. And as Jeff said, kind of make it easier on the host and the participants. Rupert asked about quality of the show. Well, really, the quality of the show is in the content. So the content in the end is always king. And how we wrap it up and how we package it is just icing on the cake.
And that's always the trick, is not to have the icing take over and have it be, all icing and very little cake, or as when I grew up, we'd say all hat and no cattle. Go ahead, Greg. No, sorry. I jumped to the wrong one there.
I was just reinforcing you, Alex. I was just saying, yeah, man, you're right. Yeah, keep preaching.
Yeah,
I think that it's there are other roles that have to be played too, and that is that when the host of the show is all of a sudden given this beautiful shiny icing on the cake, there has to be also a voice in the head of everybody saying, hey, just remember that make sure that everything happens in service to what it is that is being talked about. And so that kind of discussion had to be had. And I think it's a really important, it's something that I've discovered in learning, in doing this, that's a really important role. And it's not always just the wires. Sometimes it's the wetware too.
Absolutely. Next question.
Georgie Kennedy Jr. back again from Washington, D.C. with this one for Jonas particularly. Why did you develop your own S3 script for moving documents around the globe versus using CyberDuck and Mounting Duck?
Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the things is I want to make it easy, and we want to build something that doesn't require us to send you a bunch of files, then credentials. The website is publicly available and just protected with a passcode right now. If Ken is sick, I don't have to spend an hour with somebody going through their setup, finding out why Mountain Duck is not mounting, having the FBI call out S3 so all the security programs block your S3 bucket suddenly. All that stuff happens. And because of that, I decided to build a web interface. So if we hand over to any designer, they know how to upload a file to a web interface. Just stay to the stuff that the people know and not make it more complicated for them.
You go, Chriag.
So Ryan on my team actually, came up with the idea initially for us to use S3. And the reason being is we didn't want to spin up all our systems just to put in production files into the cloud. So we would go ahead and produce all of our files, the videos, lower thirds, everything like that. We would then put into our S3 bucket. Once we were ready to start the show, we would just grab those files and then run the show on vMix in the cloud. And then afterwards, if we had any recordings or anything, we could just push that back to S3, shut down our machines, and we know our files were all secure in S3. So that's one of the reasons why we did it.
Go ahead, George.
It was good to see the backend that Jonas is using. Obviously, like right now, I have like 10 buckets mounted on my desktop. I use Mountain Duck. Again, I know, Alex, so we could hire folks to do a lot of these things, and I do, but also it's an adventure for me to learn, you know, the back end of AWS, learning about just learn those, just learn those processes and how to generate policies. There's so much there, and as time goes on, is being able to contribute back and forth to this community as you learn the back end of the AWS and everything that we're doing.
And the thing that I'll say to everyone is get involved as much as we can with these test programs, these test projects. Figure out how you can, you know, where you can contribute and where you can help, because the best way to learn this is to be in the middle of it, not to read about it or try to build up a test case or whatever, but to have a real show, you know, to kind of jump into and work on. And then also we're going to be doing, again, monthly, one Wednesday every month, we're going to do AWS, just Q&A as we're figuring it out, talking about things. We may even have people show a couple things, show and tell, but we want to make sure that we're bringing everybody, you know, up to speed. So if you have things to show, let me know, and I'll start throwing that schedule out so we know when that's coming up for everyone. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back with, did you enable AWS billing alerts?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yes, I do this stuff now daily. I build out a lot of infrastructure. Billing alerts are the thing that keep me from not being able to sleep at all. And also I have one of the things that I always do is I do a screenshot before I go to bed and just send it to my phone. So if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can look at the screen that told me everything's shut down.
That's great. Next question.
Jesse Mills in the San Francisco Bay Area. How was SRT used?
Go ahead, Jonas.
SRT was used to send from Guy. Guy can elaborate how he sent it to Trinidad, because it was a last-minute production and we weren't able to spin up another Zoom room for Guy to contribute.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, this one was pretty last minute, so I just used Wirecast on the PC, which I was already doing so many other things on this PC that it's just a Razer gaming laptop, and it brought it to its knees. I was running at 90% CPU. Had I had it just a little bit more time, I would have fired up this encoder. This is a Pro Ink. This is about a $995 encoder that'll do 4K 30 H.265 SRT, and I just would have jammed it up with this. So that would have lightened my load on my PC, and because it was already doing so much work. But yeah, and yeah.
Next question.
Our friend Liberty White, who does not appear on the panel enough, from Atlanta, says, great teamwork all. What, if any, change would you make in the future for your workflow?
Go ahead, Chriag.
So one thing I mentioned at the beginning is we want to make incremental changes. We don't want to just do everything at once. So anything that we're going to do is going to be small little changes. And that's based on feedback that we're receiving. People that are in the back end watching, you know, just people from office hours as well. But also what's really important is what Tilak said, is we want to make changes that fit in with the conversation and not detract from it. So we've got to be very careful in terms of what changes we make. So that's what I'd say to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Tilak.
So the biggest problem that we're struggling with, it was a problem when we did not have the cloud production, and it's a problem more so now, is the questions. Bringing the questions in from the viewers has been a real big problem, and the reason for that is because it's a little hard to understand as a viewer where the questions should go, and how to sort of work with that. And then as the person who's asking the questions, or you know, dealing with that, how to make sure that those get answered in the right way. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, and so we're working on it.
No, we have something that can help with that, and I'm a little behind on getting it set up for Tony. So we'll work on that. Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the goals that I and Chriag had when we thought about this and why we brought in Marcus is we want to bring on more people. We like showing people how easy it is to cut for people. We're ramping up our infrastructure right now, and if we have that nailed, I'm sure we'll find some roles that people can fill out if they want to help out, get some experience.
Yeah, and I think that we want to err on the side of, within stability, err on the side of too many people rather than, you know, usually you don't get the luxury of having, you know, just throwing people at the problem. But there's a real opportunity for people to learn, as well as for us to create shows that generate a possibility such that our clients down the road go, I want that. How much does that cost? And well, it takes 30 people to do that. Okay. Like literally it will be that. It won't be like, oh, I can only afford 1 person or 5 people. We want to create that possibility that our clients can see. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, Alex, I don't want to just detract from what you just said, but I just wanted to say too, I mean, it seems like a fairly complex production, and in a lot of ways it is, but the fact of the matter is that it's also a system that one person can operate by themselves if they have to.
If they have to. The main thing though is that, like there's the reality of today, but you'd be surprised at how many productions can be done. I mean, that have the budgets are there. Like, we just want to make sure that we're clear that we're doing these just these tiny razor budgets. But there are clients out there that will pay real money to have it. They just want to pay for something that actually looks good and sounds good and operates, and the budgets will open up. And that's what we have the opportunity to do with these shows, is open those doors to those larger budgets that hire lots of people to do this. When we walk into a physical production, for those of us who work in physical productions, walk into a big event with 15,000 people, there's 100 people working on that event. Like, there's, and so, you just have to change that mindset that if there's 15,000 people online, there might be 100 people or 50 people producing that event rather than, 3, and we just have to move the conversation forward.
Well, I mean, I think you're exactly right. There's a lot of events like that where they have that kind of budget and in the scale that's needed. There's also a big market out there for people who are doing much smaller events in a shorter time frame, and you don't necessarily have to have a gigantic team to be able to pull those events off successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Lou Perez, back from Queen Creek, Arizona. And Lou asks, the conversations with Tony Mobley has grown so much in a short time. What changes can we expect in the near and long term?
Go ahead, Talon.
So in having lots of really long and wonderful conversations with Tony, I think one of the things that we are really going to push to do is to break out of the audience bubble that we have here, and also of the content bubble. So we're going to start talking about some things that are not necessarily ZoomISO or lighting design, or so that's coming soon, and I think that's going to introduce extra challenges, and it's going to be fun for you all to work on those things where we don't have a panel of trained office hours people with the right rhythm and timing of answering questions and not talking over each other.
Next question.
Victor Cajillo in Brookings, South Dakota's next question. I'll be returning to the Sax Jam next April. What are ways that you guys who did this would envision technically doing something similar to my show?
Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the things for your show, it might make more sense to use something like the Belfast method. But one of the things is we are not only working on cloud production, we're working on remote productions. How do you build a team? How do you communicate over 3 different continents, 4 different countries, different time zones and everything? And that's something that even you, with your remote production, you could spin out the remote production much more and let people help you more. And I think that's something where, like, all the experience that we're gaining right now of doing that with a larger team could really come in.
We'll be ready for you, Victor, when you come back. So when you come back to it, we'll be ready. We'll be a lot further along when you get back than we are now. Hey, Bill, I'm going to have you continue down. I'd like to finish these conversations off. We did close off the questions, but I'd like to finish these ones. But I have a 9 o'clock, so I'm going to drop out. Someone should just ping me in the back end when we're done, and I'll get the after hours started. So just send me something on Discord. I'll keep it open, but I have to jump for a client call.
Understood.
All right, see everybody. Incredible work, everybody, and keep it going. All right.
Thank you, Alex, for being here and for starting all this, because that's what we're learning. The next question to help us learn a little bit more comes from George Kennedy in Washington, D.C. And he says, Chriag, any audio challenges while producing conversations with Tony Mobley? Is the team using Unity Comms on the back end? Anybody? Let's see. And I have to go over and manage it through here. And Chriag has his question at first, so let's go there.
Sure. So, one thing that we did for the first week was we wanted to keep this very simple because we only had that ramp up time of 24 hours. So we actually just went into the after hours breakout room, and that's how we were communicating. And obviously it worked for a little bit, but then as the chatter started coming into that room, it got a bit distracting. So, and that, the second week we went to Unity Comms. So what we did was we were on our own comms line on the side. So Marcus could not hear anything in after hours, but we pumped it back into after hours so everybody could hear it. But, Jonas, Guy, and I were all in there so we could hear what was happening in that room as well. But we actually did split, everything out.
George Kennedy.
Awesome. Not too many audio issues I saw. Let me just say this because I know we're going to close out because you guys didn't talk about this. I think the last show, I think it was so effective because obviously a lot of us watch a lot of content. I think the way you had that 5-box layout, it didn't puzzle me. I was excited about it because I haven't seen it used in that way. So kudos to you guys being able to have that 2 boxes on the side and then 3 in the middle, and it worked. And what I also want to say, we don't talk a lot about Apple TV, but I think being able to see it, and Jonas, like you mentioned, why the 1080p is so important, is being able to watch it on Apple TV. And I guess by now you guys know I'm excited about Apple TV and watching content on it. I watch a lot of Apple TV, and those boxes made a big difference. And there weren't 16:9 boxes, and it made a difference as filling the guests into it. So many times you look at a 3-up and everyone is falling out of the frame and so forth. There was none of that, rarely. So kudos to you guys on what you did with this particular show. I think it was very exciting to watch it.
Outstanding. All right, moving on to the next question. Douglas. Oh, is there somebody else?
One thing with the audio that's really important is that you monitor audio on the encode. And that's a small vMix tip is if you set up your main audio to the headphones that you monitor with, you hear the main audio versus headphone audio, which I really like because otherwise there's confusing things where you hear stuff that's not on the program. So I was just listening to the program.
I think it's interesting if you've never been on IFB during some kind of performance or something, the multiple streams of communication is something you have to learn. And it's fun once you become inured to that and understand how it works. All right, let's move on to Douglas Carmichael's question. And he says, in a space-related discussion group I'm in, the power consumption of a large broadcast, the Olympics or a rock show, something like that, was used as a point of comparison. Could the Mobley process make the broader industry more efficient and less resource intensive? And Jonas is the only person who has a ping in there, so let's go to him.
I would not only say power, because of course, the one thing with AWS is they can optimize for power consumption. They can build a big solar grid because it's all closer and a big centralized unit. But one of the things is why it's more resource efficient is because I have it off right now. Somebody else might be producing a show on the exact same hardware than we run, or somebody is doing a live stream or whatever they need to do. And while I'm not using the hardware isn't sitting there and getting rusty. We are not using hardware, like we're not buying a bunch of hardware and then throwing it away after the show or not using it. It's used a lot. And that's one of the things where the cloud is really helpful.
I guess not having to helicopter a transmitter tower up to the top of the mountain really makes a difference when you're trying to build out communications around the world. Let's move on to Sam Greenwood in Toronto, Canada. And Sam asks, anyone know of a cross-platform streaming dashboard like Apple's TV app? And I see nobody has clicked in on the answer to that. Maybe there's nobody who uses Apple TV here or understands that. So we're going to unfortunately have to move along. Let's get to Douglas Carmichael's next question, and he has it specifically. Let's say you could combine ProtoStream's multi-channel audio transport services in with the Mobley process, fully virtual production. Could you easily apply the process to a concert, streamed or hybrid, for example? Ooh, and that doesn't have any. Well, we've got a couple of hands here, but I'm not seeing those names. Wonder why that is. My part of the dashboard doesn't have anybody showing.
We can just raise our hands for the last two questions.
Yeah, let's just do that. Excellent. We're going to start with Jonas and then go to Ken Jordan. Thanks.
So we don't even need multi-channel audio transport if we are mixing in the cloud. What's really interesting is we might be able to run the mixing engine, the AMP mix engine in the cloud, which would be exciting because then you can have it on a more traditional audio workflow versus just vMix. I don't see how a fully virtual production makes sense for a concert at the moment, because you would need to bring in all the cameras. And even then, if you bring in all the cameras, I probably would bring in one A1 on the venue that is doing the mix there instead of piping all the multi-channels up to the cloud. For me, it doesn't make sense to go that additional step. You could have the A1 remote control that console with something like ProtoStream, but the Belfast method makes more sense for a concert at the moment, I think.
And so that means that everybody watching this should pay attention to the Belfast concerts and watch what these guys are doing, because it's pretty amazing. Ken, did you have your hand up for weighing in on that?
Yeah, it was only just that any more of these names, the Belfast method and the Mobley process, I don't have any more of these domain names I'm going to be able to get.
So if you want to do a show, get your names, get your show name sorted on the web or GoDaddy or wherever you go fast, because a lot of this is going to be happening. Let's move on to Douglas Carmichael, our last question here, and I need to get my cursor over to hit the answer button. And here we go. Could you see a networked audio engine like Waves Emotion LV1 be useful for mixing the live audio for the show? Would there be latency issues transporting the raw feeds long distances and pushing the final mixes back? And I'll allow anybody to raise their hands, but we talk about this latency in audio just constantly on office hours. So Jonas, go ahead and dive into that.
I don't think that specific mix engine would make sense, because I don't think it can run in the cloud yet. So you would need to bring everything down and up again. While saying that, you can, after we done the whole vision mixing, you can, in theory, send down all the multi-tracks over something like SRT where latency doesn't matter, because then the audio engineer just lives in history. Like he can live 10 seconds behind what's really happening. There's some situation where that's not ideal, but that's possible, and then you could do it. Other than that, I would love to work with somebody like Mickey or Jeff, or one person that actually does audio engineering and not only us moving some faders in vMix, on having an instance that's more focused on audio and doing it all in the cloud. And yeah, latency with our program feed was not really an issue. It was right there with the
I was fascinated when Guy was talking earlier today about not using Unity comms as the backend, but doing them doing them live in the Zoom rooms? Was that what I heard you talking about earlier, Guy?
Yeah, we wound up on the first one just because, like Chriag was saying, we didn't have a whole lot of time, so we used it. But as the breakout room grows in popularity, we're going to have to use Unity comms, and like we did, we piped it back.
Yeah, I think the thing that caught my attention was that you were using a technique that
concentrate doesn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. The thing that caught my attention is you're using a technique that wouldn't be obvious. I could think Unity comms for the communication backend, that's what it's built for. But when people start using these things that aren't built for something and get a really good result doing it, that always intrigues me. It means that there are multiple ways to get to the same place. Greg Gibson, you have your hand up, go for it.
Yeah, just one thing about the Zoom Room NDI and the ISO audio. The latency on that is almost nil. And in fact, then the first show, we started with like a 4-second or a 4-frame offset in the audio to try to anticipate any potential latency. Because one of the things everybody said was like, man, the audio's got to be right on this, because if the audio sync is off, that's going to be the first thing that people notice. And we ended up taking that that delay off fairly quickly in the program, because the Zoom Room NDI was just right on the money. Typically, when I run Zoom Room NDI on my network here, because I'm on a slower network than I am inside of AWS, I tend to add a little bit of audio delay to make the audio sync up better. But inside of AWS, we've got 25 megabits machine to machine, and that pretty much just disappeared.
Jonas, go ahead.
And one thing talking about latency, some of you might not realize on the screenshot, we're not running it in the US. All our cloud instances are in Ireland because that's where my VPC is located. So it's not like we are close to the cloud servers from Zoom. We are close because we're in the same cloud provider, but we're not that close. And I think that's something to consider, that you can still do it. It's possible.
Tony.
I just wanted to say thank you to this community. And I know that, Alex has, said to me on numerous occasions about not having the need to say thank you, but I feel the need to say thank you because this has been a community effort. It has impacted me in a way that I really can't even describe to all of you. So I want to say thank you so much to the community for all of those people who have made an extra effort to help Conversation with Tony Mobley be what it is. And I believe that it's getting better every week because of the support, the encouragement that you guys have given me. It is going to be an opportunity for all of us to get to know each other better and to continue to break down a few barriers that we have in this world. And I believe that. And it might be, naive to say, but I believe that. So again, I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to have this conversation and all of the support. I do not take it for granted, and I am very thankful. And there are individuals who are so many that I can't name, but I want to lift up one name in particular, my brother, Talak Lopez Waterman, because he has sort of anchored me in having these conversations. And, the infrastructure in terms of all of the support, the webinar, the tools, the equipment, the donations that have been made in order for me to have the conversations with Tony Mobley go forward. Who would have thought, I had the nerve to start conversations with a basic webcam and one Mac Mini, and so far from where I actually started when I came on office hours, but things just keep evolving, and this has turned into a conversation that is beautiful to look at. And I think, and I hope and pray that the content continues to move as I say, the shiny continues. So thank you all so much.
Tony, in response to that, I think you, among everybody that we've had here on office hours from the beginning, have been a shining example of somebody coming in with an attitude of kindness, care, and generosity. That was one of the things that we locked onto when you first came in and didn't know much about the technology of this. And we're not among the most advanced engineering types that we have here. What shone through the whole thing was your heart and how you connected with people. And it tells us over and over again that really what matters in communication isn't the pipes, it's the presentation. It's what you say and how you say it. You've engaged with a tremendous number of people, and the humility of saying, I don't know everything about everything. That's what makes you such an engaging person on this, and why I think we're as lucky to have you as you are to know this group of people. And we hope that this continues. This is part of the office hours heart and soul, that everybody has a place here. Everybody has a contribution. And whatever your contribution is, whether it's that ability to connect with people and ask questions and engage with them, or whether it's the technical side and understanding how to make these pipes function, everybody has a place in it. It's been just a privilege to know you through the whole thing. So we're at the end of the show. Thank you all for being here today. I'm
one last thing, Bill,
yeah,
if you don't mind, one last thing. So I'm I have an understanding for me how personally, how important the conversations are. I'm going to ask, and I know this is a big ask, if you have not subscribed, if you have not liked, if you haven't viewed, please go back and look at the earlier episodes as well, because the conversation, the initial conversation, the first conversation that I had with Hasma was powerful. I didn't have all of the things that I have now, but that conversation was very powerful. And as some of you may know, that he is doing his own show on Saturdays, and I encourage the community to support everyone who is doing something. Mark Horner, who's going to be on with me next week on my conversation as one of the guests. Special guest next week is going to be my niece, Siobhan Mobley. But there are going to be other guests that will be participating in the conversation. So I want to lift up Mark Horner. I want to lift up Zoom Test Kitchen. I want to lift up the worship technology shows, AV Tech Talks, all of the shows that have spring forth from office hours. We need to support all of the shows, all of the conversations, all of the different activities that are going forth from this community, and like and subscribe and support them. If they're in Facebook, support them in Facebook, support them in YouTube. This is the way in which we let people know what we're doing, and also we get validation by their likes and their subscription. So thank you all for this, and Alex, thank you so much for us having this review of the production of Conversation with Tony Mobley.
All righty then. I think that's the last word. I'm going to just, if somebody wants to cue Alex to go ahead and kill the stream, Guy Cochran, I need to talk to you later, but I'll ping you about that. And that's for something next week. And thank you all for tuning in to Office.